Hey, good people, Davia here, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Shaker, a Davia Williams Stevenson podcast. You're going to have a good time today, okay? I've got my friend here, the Honorable Judge Laurel Beatty Blunt, but she's just going to be Laurel today.
Yes.
And we've been having a good time long before these cameras started rolling, so I hope that we kind of let you in on the party a little bit, and on the conversation that's flowed from salt and pepper and Glorilla to the law to faith to all manner of things. And that's what I love. I like a real person, a real conversation. And here's what we know, because it happens every time. You're going to hear something in this conversation that's going to spark something in you, and maybe it'll cause you to shake some things up in your own life. So I want to tell you a little bit about her. But I'm really going to let her kind of finish that up, because there's a lot to tell, and I want to get to the personality and the heart of this.
There's a lot of personality.
Woman. There's a lot of personality. We'll do what we can in this 30 minutes or so that we have. But Laurel has a native of Columbus, Ohio, went to a great home school, a Columbus School for Girls, went to college at Spelman, which we were talking about was one of the best decisions of your life. It really shaped you. I hear that often. I did not go to an HBCU, and I wonder how that would have changed things, although we had our own little community at University of Oklahoma. Felt like we created our own HBCU. But have moved from doing the law in a number of places, from interpreting the law, I think is what you said, to creating the law? Is that, would that be the?
Yes, when I was lobbying, you're on
lobbying,
you're on the legislative side, helping them to craft bills about elections. That's what I was doing.
Okay, so give me just introduce yourself. Give me a little bit of a flow, because I know you've done a number of things, and you're doing something really interesting now. So we want to talk about that a little bit too.
You know, I want to start with a fun history fact, if you don't mind,
Absolutely.
Davia, because I think it is relevant because it has shaped a lot of who I am. So my grandparents, Otto Beatty Sr. and my grandma Myrna, owned a restaurant in Columbus called the Novelty Food Bar. And it was during segregation. And so at that time, their restaurant was one of two restaurants that Black people could go to in Columbus. Wow. And so my grandparents would tell me all of the different people that they would see during the 24 hours that their restaurant was open. They were also particularly progressive for their time, in that not only did they use their profits to support the Negro Leagues, as they were called at that time. So this is
during Jim Crow?
This is like the 40s and 50s, yeah. And, not only are they using it to support the Negro Leagues, but also specifically women's basketball. And, as you know, women are still fighting to be seen in sports. And so I'm very proud of the fact that my grandparents way back then were supporting women's sports. But yes, I grew up in Columbus, and then I went to Spelman College, the number one HBCU in the country. Thank you very much. But that was mostly because, I was told, like, everyone in my family had gone to HBCUs. My mom, Rosalind, went to Wilberforce. My dad went to Howard. My stepmom, Joyce, went to Central State. And my older brother had gone to Morehouse. Okay. So it was a very comfortable place for me. I loved seeing all the different types of Black women that there are on the face of this earth, because they are all represented at Spelman College. I did not find that intimidating. I found that encouraging. I was the smart Black girl at my school, and then you get to Spelman and everybody's is that. And so at Spelman, I got the opportunity to have race and gender taken away. Yes. And so that really, it leaves you. Mm-hmm. And so it fortified me, and I learned so much, and I still carry those lessons with me. Some of my very best friends that I've made were from Spelman. specifically from the dorm freshman year.
Okay.
And then also, even when I was trying to be a federal judge, the Spelman Morehouse Network was really helping me. Ultimately, I was unsuccessful, obviously, because of politics, but it was nice to know it was there. So then I went to Spelman. Then I went to Vanderbilt for law school. I went to a really large firm at first, where I was the only Black attorney out of 200 lawyers.
Practicing what type of law then?
I was in the litigation department, and at the time, the firm was doing a lot of defense for, I don't know if you remember the diet drug fen-phen, that a lot of people said caused them to have heart attacks and strokes. So we were doing the defense work for that company. After that, 1 out of 200 is a very lonely place.
Yes, for sure.
So after that, I told my mom, I said, I will walk barefoot up 71 to get back to Columbus.
Okay. So home wasn't so bad.
Home wasn't so bad.
Okay.
And
Columbus has done some incredible growing, not just in the businesses that are here, but in a mindset. There's a shift. There's an ethos shift here that I really like for the most part. There's some,
Well, I think that growing up, people would call it slow lumbus and things like that. But I don't think that people recognized back then that Columbus, being more white collar with OSU and all the retail and all the insurance companies, is what caused Columbus to keep growing. Whereas you have Cleveland and Columbus, or Cleveland and Cincinnati, that were traditionally larger cities, but they were manufacturing based. And that manufacturing base was awesome for a minute because it did do things like create the middle class. But then when the manufacturing went away, now those cities aren't doing as well as they were once before. Whereas Columbus is doing fine.
Yeah, it is.
It's actually growing.
It's growing. I think it's the only major city in Ohio that's still growing.
Right. So then I practiced in large, medium, small firms. I did plaintiff's work. I did defense work. The hardest job I had was when I practiced with my dad, because nobody ever wants the person who paid for them to go to school to think that they were stupid.
Okay. Well,
or lazy.
Yeah.
So, but that is also where I learned the most.
Okay. So your grandparents had the store. Your
Yes.
dad was also right.
Yes. So there's a legacy of child labor in the Beatty family.
Okay.
So my grandparents owned the restaurant that I was telling you about.
Yeah.
And my dad grew up peeling potatoes in the restaurant.
Okay.
And then that is what allowed him to ultimately go to law school. Even though when he was in law school, what OSU would do is they would have a Black person and a woman in every other class. So, law school's 3 years. So his second year, he was the only Black person, and then there was one woman. But fast forward, so then he graduates from law school. There were no big law firm opportunities for Black lawyers at that time. And so he hung out his own shingle. He did well enough to buy a building downtown. And what he did was he used that building to rent out to other Black attorneys.
Okay.
If there was a wonderful man named Clenzo Fox that practiced law for a very, very long time. And what he told me why my dad having the building was such a big deal was because what would happen is Black professionals would have a really hard time getting people to rent office space to them. And there was one man that had a building downtown, and so they would go and ask to rent space, and then that particular landlord, I don't know what his name was, but that particular landlord would then tell them to go and get a letter from Chalmers P. Wiley, that the VA is named after, get a letter from him basically signing off saying that they were okay, and then he would rent space to them. So they had, it's like the ultimate credit check, right? So my dad having a building and Black lawyers not having to go through that was a big deal. But where the child labor comes in is that so my brother and I, we grew up spending our summers working 40 hours a week in the law firm. Filing, going, at the time there was no electronic filing. So going down to the courthouse and filing things, or going and, we would have to introduce ourselves to the bailiff and tell them who we were and why we were there. It wasn't glamorous, but looking back, it taught me work ethic. It taught me a lot of things. And then along the same lines, my children will be working, somewhere for me. Okay. My brother and sister-in-law are business owners. They'll be working there somewhere.
Okay. I love it.
But that's also, Davia, how I really saw how the law impacts people's everyday lives. We tend to automatically go to the huge cases that you see on TV. Huge company A is suing huge company B. And unfortunately, the result of that is that people think, oh, I'll never need a judge. I don't have to pay attention to courts because I'll never be there. And that is not right. Because first of all, most litigation is not going to go through federal court that gets most of the attention. Most litigation happens in state court. And in places like where we live, Ohio, state court judges are elected. And so by the time you're in front of the judge, it's too late to worry about who the judge is. But if you are going to have interaction with the court, your interaction is most likely to be in state court, and two, in one of two courts. Municipal court, because municipal court has small claims and it has traffic. Or domestic relations court, where, the divorce, alimony, child support, those types of things are handled. And so really that's how Laurel Lays Down the Law came about, was because I have to campaign to keep my job every 6 years. And, going around the county and seeing just how much people don't know. Seeing how people are making decisions based on bad information. And so that's where Laurel Lays Down the Law came about.
I have been enjoying that. So just for the listeners, and we're going to make sure that we put a link to your show. And, I certainly share the videos when I see them. But I have said that, what do you want to do with that? Because I can see that going a number of places with your personality and the good information and the humor with which you share your tidbits about the law. In our conversation before the cameras were running, we were talking about communities in general, and that you really can understand the health of a community if you pay attention to the courts.
Absolutely.
In the courts.
Absolutely.
So say a little bit more about that. You kind of teased it a little bit before you talked about Laurel Lays Down the Law, and we'll go there. But say more. What do you see about a community through its courts?
So, for example, when I took the bench, it was during the foreclosure crisis. And so that's also where I learned that I was seeing special things that I needed to go tell the community. And so with the foreclosure crisis, I was honest and told people, yes, this is a huge problem. And I also told them there are some cases where I look at everything and I'm like, ooh, I don't know how you thought you were going to keep this house.
Okay.
But there were also, Davey, I will never forget the time there was a foreclosure case, single mom, 2 kids in nursing school, and she had worked out with the bank. She had caught her mortgage up, and they were proceeding with the case on like $200 worth of fees. And it was obvious that the bank and the lawyers for the bank weren't communicating. And I was able to go in and get the case settled. And then I saw in my conference room the woman's daughter praying, saying, "Dear God, thank you so much that we can stay in our house." And it really just struck me like what an impact. And so that's really when I started saying, hey, we don't necessarily live in such a mutually exclusive world, because it was true that some people had just signed up for houses that they probably shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And it was also true that there were people that were doing their best, that had the medical bills and had all of these things where, you know, the dollar was only going to go so far, and they had some really tough choices to make. So I was going out into the community and saying, hey, both of these things are true. And it was something that our community was seriously being impacted by, that I was seeing in my courtroom. Another one for sure is the opiate epidemic.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely saw that. You know, I have seen people give up their licenses. And, you know how hard you work when you get a license, and then you know how hard you work to keep your license, right? And so people willing to give that up for drugs showed me how strong addiction is, because you're willing to give that up for a few minutes of high.
You're always chasing that first high.
Yeah. And to me, that's incredible. Yeah. That tells you how strong it is. I saw people giving up licenses. I saw people, leaving their kids in inappropriate places. I even had a defendant who she had obtained MRSA from sharing needles. And then she would shoot up in the abscesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the other thing, when you think about addiction, and I know that's not a trail we want to stay on, but they don't start out. It's not a personality defect or a character flaw. Addiction it takes over those areas of your life. So when we see someone who is addicted, you said people have licenses, all walks of life. Doctors and lawyers and what have you, as well as those who are struggling to get started or falling off of whatever. So do those stories stick with you? Like you talked about, one lady was shooting up in her abscess. You remember that story. You remember the little girl who was praying to stay in her house. Like, we know what being housed does for the future of an individual, and what being unhoused does.
Right.
And so to know that your work had direct effect. You don't get to see the end game probably on a lot of these stories. They come through your point of time in their lives. I would imagine for most. I guess there's some people that you see on repeat, but
there is one guy that is doing really well, and I bugged the hell out of him.
I love it.
So this young man, Davia, I really love him, and I consider it a blessing. Because so what happened was, he was on my docket, and in the course of him being on probation, we would talk about his two daughters a lot. And so then he did what he was supposed to do. He got off probation. Then he actually got a job with the county.
Okay.
And so I see him around the building all the time. And you know what we talk about, Davia? We talk about the type of father that he would have been versus the type of father that he is now. Okay. And it fills my heart to know that really just through 5 minutes of my day doing my job, I could have changed the course of a family, Davia, because he has custody of the girls. And so he's a better father, which is going to influence the type of mothers that they will be if they choose to do that. Or even if they're aunties or teachers or whatever. Like, that keeps me going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then there is, I really love this, Davia.
Okay.
There is someone that was on my docket that I see regularly because our kids go to the same school.
Okay. Yeah, I love that.
I love it too.
I love that. Yeah.
Because one thing I also say that is true, but it takes some courage to say this because it's not popular, is that it is both true that there are people that deserve a second chance or maybe even a third. And there are people that we need protection from.
Yes. Yeah.
And so when I was actively sentencing, when I was a common pleas court judge, absolutely, there were times, Davia, where I was sitting there, girl, adding up the numbers to see how long I could keep our community safe from this person. And then there were definitely other times where I was trying to be creative and think to myself, how can I use my resources to change this person's behavior?
You know, when you think about, you said that, you know, in the state of Ohio, judges are elected.
Yeah.
And how much disengagement there is in the electoral process in our communities.
Especially around judges.
I would say especially around, because we don't know who they are. You know, you have to run a campaign, but oftentimes we still don't know who you are.
Right.
And we certainly don't know those stories. We don't know that you're impacting our neighbor in that way.
Right.
We don't know that you're keeping this guy off the street in that way. And so what I love about Laurel Lays Down the Law is you're addressing common questions.
Yes.
That have actual impact. One was, I remember the one you talked about, are you filming with your,
Oh, yes, concealed record, yes.
But, it was funny, the way you talked about it, but who is not walking around? We're all on somebody's camera.
Yeah.
Everybody's doing pictures. Everybody's got their cameras going. And whether we're behind the lens on purpose or whether we're walking by. And so you see often these, I'm on Instagram probably far more than I need to be as a grown-ass woman, but you see all these folks going into a rage that they're being filmed.
Yeah.
And you can't film me. That's not legal. I'm like, well, you're in a public space.
Yeah.
And the law is different in public spaces as opposed to, I didn't follow you into the bathroom.
Right.
Right. Those types of things. So I thought that was really humorous, but useful. Think twice before you post kind of thing.
Exactly. Yes.
That you said. And then there was one with heavier content when you talked about sexual assault.
Yeah.
That is very real.
You know what, Davia? That one took me by surprise. And I kind of had to get myself together on that one. The video that was about myths about rape.
Yes.
I had already done the video about sexting. And I'd already noticed that people didn't engage a lot, but it was shared a bazillion times. Yeah. And so I was like, oh yeah, all of my friends probably made all of their kids watch this. And the one about rape myths was on my heart. I was a little scared to do it. Okay. But I really feel like I'm partly doing this for me. Because especially the one about rape myths was really scary to do, Davia. It's not something that people want to talk about. But it's an area where I saw two things going on. One was that we either don't talk about it or we only talk about it to women and girls. And if we don't talk about it to women and girls, they don't necessarily what's going on. And if we don't talk about it to men and boys, neither do they.
Neither do they.
And so then the problem comes in with someone who's charged with rape, which is a very serious felony. But, their friend in the locker room said, if it's anal penetration, it's not rape. Yes, it is. And you're going off of what your friend said in the locker room. And the next thing you know, you've got a felony in front of you. Yeah. So it was something that I knew I was scared to talk about it, but I was just so passionate that I talk about it and that I specifically make the point to talk to everyone about it.
What was the fear? You said a couple times, I was scared to talk about it. What's the fear? That you mislead, that you miss something?
I was so passionate about getting the message out. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. I didn't want to trigger anybody. I just want to do get my message out in the right way, And as I thought, not a ton of people like commented.
Oh yeah.
But a lot of people shared. Yeah. And my DMs, Davia, blew up.
Okay.
And you know what it blew up with? It's with several male survivors. And in reading their messages, Davia, I could just tell the stigma that they felt, even as grown men, of being, of that happening to them. Yeah. And it just made me so sad,
That was very courageous and necessary. They were seen.
Yes.
It wants to be seen.
And so then in getting myself together, I was sad. I just was sad that, that's happened to people, but then I was like, but hey girl, that means you got to keep with these videos.
You do.
You got to keep going, and you just got to keep mixing the kind of funny with the serious.
So that's a good question. How are you coming up with your topics? And how often are you filming them? You've got quite a few. You just started, but there's a lot of them.
Well, honestly, when my hair and makeup's done, I just sit down. I just sit down in my home office and film a couple. It is, it's funny, Davia, because here's the thing, like, I work in a court. There's no need for a marketing department or anything like that. So I don't have anybody to film them. I don't have anybody to write the scripts. I write the scripts and then make my kids help me film them.
That child labor again.
Yes, here we go, right. But it's important to me, and so I make the time just like any other priority.
Yeah, I love it. And the topics.
The topics are just things that I get asked a lot about, mistakes I've seen people make, and that's why a lot of the videos that I'm going to do are going to be about criminal law and domestic law, because those are the two areas where I get the most questions. Divorce versus disillusion will be coming out soon.
It's a good one. That's very relevant to a number of folks.
It's very relevant. And, I do think with that one, it will help some people actually make a decision. Because what I explain is that disillusion is when everyone agrees. I think in my video, I said something like, disillusion is when you're like, hey, you can have the couch and let's just walk away from this, or something like that. A divorce is technically a lawsuit. You are suing someone to end your marriage. And so at the end of the day, the difference is a lot
of money,
time and money. Yes. And so even with that video, hopefully the information that I have in there will help someone decide which route to go, or maybe even inspire someone to agree so that they can get a dissolution.
I've always thought that it should be harder to get married and easier to break up.
Oh, yeah. I would say that about having kids. Because I see, Davia, I point out to people that, on a criminal docket, what you might see many times over is a prostitute that has a substance abuse problem. And she's prostituting to feed her drug habit. Okay. And then if she gets pregnant, she might not know who the dad is. And Davia, I submit to you or anybody else that person is literally going to have a hard time when the sperm meets the egg. Because mom's probably on drugs, dad might be on drugs. So literally, when the sperm meets the egg, that child has an uphill battle.
Yeah.
And we have to not live in our own bubbles and realize that happens. I would also say, Davia, there are 3 areas that don't see race, gender, or class. domestic violence, substance abuse, and mental health.
Yes, come on now.
Those three things, they don't care.
Was an important message.
They don't care if you live in Dublin. And guess what, Davia? If you go to a rehabilitation center and you're coming back to you can come back to a mansion in Powell. But if that's where you did your drugs, if that's where the drug dealer knows to come find you and offer you a BOGO, it's still going to be hard. It's just more rooms to hide your drugs. It's just as hard as if you did drugs and you're going back to a place that's not so glamorous. It's still the place and the people where you did your drugs, where the problem lies.
And they're invested in your problem.
Right. The big difference in the substance abuse and the mental health areas, though, insurance. Because when I was sentencing, if someone had insurance, it was just a matter sometimes, Davey, of me stopping talking because a bed was waiting for them. Whereas if you don't have insurance, and, you know, we have a very robust nonprofit community here in Columbus, but still, if you didn't have insurance and you had a mental health or a substance abuse problem, man, you could be waiting 4 days, 4 weeks, 4 months. And when you're dealing with those two areas in particular, 4 minutes, 4 hours can make a difference. Yeah, so insurance makes a big difference in those areas. And I'll never forget too, Davia, when I was in law school in Nashville, I volunteered at the YWCA shelter there. And a woman came in to talk to us, and her husband was maybe an orthopedic surgeon, maybe. And what would happen in the cycle of abuse is, you know, something would happen, he would hit her, and then he would buy her these amazing gifts. And I remember her talking one time about he bought her this gorgeous fur coat, and then he made her hold it out while he shot at it. It doesn't see race or class or gender.
That was a huge message. I hope that, because you know, when you're doing a population, there's a percentage of folks who've been touched by this, who are currently engaged in addiction or love someone who's addicted, who is recovering from, in the midst of, know someone who's in a domestic violence situation. All of us need to care for our mental health.
Yes.
That's affected by our physical health and our circumstances, our brain chemistry, or all manner of things. And so those are, like you said, they are across. They're not affected by race or gender or class. Yet there is, you think that would allow for a lack of stigma, for less stigma, yet they're highly stigmatized.
Highly.
And so I hope that what some of the listeners will take from even today's episode, and there's so much more we could talk about. We could go into why our elections are important. All of these things are affected by that. Why you care for these things. What are the signs you can look out for someone who may be involved in these spaces? What are resources that are available to you if this is one of your issues? There's so many more things we could say that we don't have time to do today. Just expresses how broad those three areas in particular are, and what a privilege it is for you with the work that you do to be able to affect lives through mercy or justice.
Yeah.
They go together, mercy or justice. And through the education that you're laying down with Laurel Lays Down the Law. And I really do enjoy that series. It is all of you. It is your personality.
It's authentic.
It is your intellect. It is all the things. It is accessible and it is practical. So whatever I can do to help blow that up, I will do. I am thrilled that you found the time. We shoot y'all in the middle of the week during the day. So people make time out of their busy schedules to come and sit and have this conversation. And so I hope that you lean in, that there's something that was said today in this conversation that inspires you to get up, to change, to shake some things up, or validate your place in life. Whatever it does, I hope it inspires you to the next thing. So thank you, Laurel.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. Today, we decided to have a glass of wine. She's a wine girl. So we went into my wine room And we're drinking a Zinfandel called Black Chicken from the Napa Valley, a 2016 vintage. It's just smooth. It's not very heavy.
I love it.
Got some nice fruit notes, but not too heavily. Sometimes Zinfandels can be gummy. And this is one of my favorites. So cheers to you. I don't know if we can reach each other.
Thank you.
Cheers to you. And best to all of you. See you next time.